Hey everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone's doing well. And what do you know? Look at this. Three different slight risk areas, three different modes just tonight. We have another one tomorrow. And then if you look towards the top right hand corner of the screen, we have a major hurricane. We have two areas of interest, one that has an 80% chance of development and another has a 50% chance. All I can say to that is that escalated pretty quick because one point we're thinking, okay, the Atlantic's pretty much cooked, nothing really to be worried about. What a difference about 48 hours makes. And then this, like, come on, wow. And then here's the interesting thing about all of this. Tonight's threat, especially over here towards Kansas, Oklahoma, seems like it might be nocturnal. And then also there is a 5% tornado threat to go along with this, which is really intriguing. We'll get into the details with that in just a little bit here. And then we also have the wind. We also have significant hail threats here with hatched risk. So yeah, things have definitely kind of ramped up a bit. And then if we go towards tomorrow, and there's actually a chance we may even do a live stream. Yeah, a live stream. Because we have a 5% tornado threat towards the Oklahoma-Arkansas line here. The threat, like I said, it's notable. Not guaranteed. It's pretty common for this time of year, but a 5% in September doesn't happen too quickly either, though. So I'm intrigued to see what happens with this. We'll talk about the dynamics with this in just a little bit here. But between that and then days 3 through 5 still having severe weather potential, even though the risk kind of drops off after tomorrow and beyond that point, it's a lot to keep track of here. So hope you guys are ready to lock in here because content is about to be on the increase here. So let's go ahead and take a look at our jet stream. Now the loop froze at the wrong time here. Thankfully we're getting back in motion at a good time. We're going to start with the GFS here. And it's this trough that's going to be our big troublemaker over these next few days for the eastern half of the U.S. and also the central plains. It's going to increase our severe weather potential. And then as we go further along here, we're going to kind of level off for a bit before another bigger trough becomes a factor as we start out the month of October. And this could bring in potentially more showers, storms, maybe even severe weather, but also cool down the temperatures a bit here over towards the eastern half of the U.S. We do see some ridging occurring over here towards the western states as well starting out. So could see some record temps up here as well towards the northern states. But at this point, the main focus really is going to be around what ends up happening over here towards the Ohio Valley, the deep south, Midwest as we start the new month here. And you can see a pretty similar outcome occurring here with the euro to go along with this. But the most interesting feature that I've made note of with the euro is, and this is if we can go back with that a bit, make sure you're paying attention to the top right hand corner of the screen. Look how far to the south this trough ends up digging. This is what really leads me to have a lot of intrigue. Now, the thing about this is GFS does not match up with this during this time frame, or at least not completely. However, there is a signal that's relatively similar that happens a little bit earlier. Which of the two models are going to win out with the scenario? Because usually what will end up happening is we'll see a run like this and then another one might have another similar run to that or to this scenario here or to, let me go and pause this actually. You see a trough kind of forming up here as well, again like I mentioned before. But usually one of these two scenarios usually end up winning out, and the other model will sometimes kind of lean into either this scenario or this scenario. I'm really intrigued with this signal though, because this will bring a major cool down, of course severe weather as I mentioned before to go along with it. With this scenario here, severe weather would be more likely, and then also the temperature drop would be much more significant. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this trend plays out here. If I were to keep the GFS moving here and if I were to match the exact time frame here, notice we look entirely different here. So if we go to the mid-afternoon here, 18Z, which would be about roughly 3 o'clock Eastern time. Look at this. Big trough here, nothing going here. So not really a whole lot in the way of conclusive data, but definitely something to make a personal note of here, especially if you're someone that's more into the forecasting side of things. Here's a look at our mid-level trough here. You can see the action ongoing here across the board. I wouldn't expect anything of major significance here outside of our areas of interest. We'll let this loop restart here on the GFS first and before we go over anything. This is going to be where our showers and thunderstorms are strongest, or our thunderstorm chances are greatest and also strongest, I should say. But outside of that, you have your general thunderstorm chances over here across the Midwest, and depending on parameters, you might get a occasionally stronger or even severe storm with that, but we haven't seen any robust signals. Pretty common for this time of year, honestly. But the signal that I'm really interested in, again, really revolves around what happens towards the back half of this model run, particularly really towards that October 4th to October 8th time frame. We avert our attention towards the top right hand corner of the screen. This is where I start to also get interested here, in particular with the euro, because that trough that digs further to the south, I'm going to try to time this here. If you want to look out ahead to the eastern half of this right here, I think this would be the point of interest if we could get other conditions to come into play here for maybe some severe weather. It would be more so towards the Appalachians, maybe the Ohio Valley, and maybe even the Mid-Atlantic, which would be the point of interest. But obviously, being as far out as we are, it's not a lot for me to latch on to at this point. You see an even stronger signal coming in here. This would probably introduce the deep south into a severe weather setup if this scenario were to play out. So, like I said, this forecast definitely looks like it's going to have its fair share of moving parts going forward here. And then I also want you to make comparisons, not just with tomorrow's setup, but we're also going to move a little bit further beyond that point and do the one thing that I normally don't do. And this is really just to kind of more or less show you the stark comparison as to what happens when you have two different models showing different outcomes and just how that affects everything in regards to forecast here, which is always why you should look at more than one model. But we'll start out with the obvious for tomorrow's setup. Again, we'll backtrack here a couple pages, and this is our tornado threat. We'll go right here, and this is where our low-level jet is the most prominent. Both of these time frames here, it's right around sunset or just a bit after dark. So it does look like there's potential for this maybe to be an evening, maybe overnight event, depending on which of these two scenarios end up winning out, if they win out at all. Because there are other parameters that we would need to look at, but if I did, it would turn into like a 2-hour-long video. Any sort of inhibition that would come into play for these storms, which I'm sure there will be a little bit considering the forcing is weak. If these storms were to not fire, nothing happens here at all. But if storms were to fire, this would be the time frame in which I would expect peak low-level jet to come into play, or the best timing for the low-level jet to come into play, which would be right around, I would say, mid to late afternoon into the overnight here. Euro kind of leans a little bit more towards overnight, whereas the GFS kind of leans into mid to late evening. If we were to move this GFS model forward here, we're going to go right towards the good stuff at the end of the model run here, which is crazy. Like I said, I normally do not do this. With that trough being weaker around this early time frame in October, not a whole lot to really write home about, truthfully. But if we were to go ahead and take a look at the Euro scenario coming into play here, watch what happens if this scenario comes into play. Look at how the low-level jet really kind of ramps up over here. This looks a little bit more textbook of like maybe a fall, early winter severe weather setup if this comes into play, which is why I'm making a little bit more of a big deal about it. I'm not saying that it happens, but it's something that if things trend in this direction more, it's something to pay attention to. And that's really what I want to drive home here. There's no reason to panic in either one of these scenarios, I would say. But at the end of the day, we want to keep you on top of things here. So let's go ahead and look at the temperatures, and then we'll also match that with our dew points here on the map here. We have the dew points in the top right hand corner. Now, the one thing that I don't like about Weather Nerds is the fact that the color table isn't like what you would expect for a moisture map, but it's only so much I can do here. I think these guys are doing a fine job. I'd just love for this to be a little different. But anyway, though, if we're looking at the temperatures here, one thing that pretty much is going to be a constant is that a lot of warm air is going to be dominant over the deep south here and over towards the desert southwest. So no real surprises there. It's going to remain pretty consistent with what we've been seeing here. There is going to be, of course, a cool down whenever those troughs come in, if they do, during this time frame around the 4th and beyond here. And with that, we'll start to see a little bit of a collision occurring here with the amount of moisture that we would have available. It's those moisture noses where we're starting to see that yellow kind of popping up here is where the chances of severe weather will be a little bit more on the prominent side. Now, you can see where we have the drier air coming into play over towards the Rockies and areas a little further off towards the north. But what I really want to make note of is just where we have that moisture nose kind of pushing back up to the north. That's going to be really where I would be watching if the GFS scenario plays out. Now, if I were to go ahead and take a look at the Euro, and we're going to switch it over to both of these, watch what ends up happening here. This is just one of these, it really just kind of feels like one of these cause and effect type of videos. But honestly, this is what happens whenever you have two differing model runs here. Notice that as we get towards the back half of this run here, as those troughs begin to come in, look at how the temperatures slowly but surely start to drop off here. But also I want you to pay attention to that moisture return that we end up getting with that stronger trough as well. And that's where my interest really starts to peak. Because with that trough, that stronger trough, more moisture gets pulled in. We get dew points into the mid 60s, which is much more favorable for severe weather. So the more stout the trough, the more significant the severe weather threat could be. Because it seems like at that point, the wind shear increases, we get increased moisture return, and that also leads to an increase in instability, also due to a collision of air masses. All four of those are key factors when it comes to severe weather development. So let's go ahead and take a look at the instability potential here. Now, at this point, really no point in getting super excited in the long range here. We're really going to focus mostly on the short range, starting really with tonight. And if we were to look at tonight, there is a decent amount of instability still available around this current time frame here. Now, whether or not these storms can organize well enough and take advantage of what's available, it's yet to be seen. We'll probably find out by the time you guys are finished watching this video here, because this is literally a nowcasting situation. This is happening probably in real time. We may get some tornado warnings out of this, or we may get nothing. It literally could be it's literally a boom or bust type of scenario. And tomorrow really could be another scenario similar to that. There's not as much in the way of instability though. So while the shear is a little bit more on the impressive side, the instability could be another limiting factor with this. So like I said, it could go either way, but based off the amount of energy that we have available at the mix layer, not looking great right now. I'm going to shift my attention towards the surface cape as well and try to see if we have any more any better of a signal, I should say. And it looks like there is a little bit more to be had with this. Usually I like looking at the mixed layer because it's usually a good sign of what to expect with all levels of the atmosphere. But really, I think this time we're going to have to put our attention more so towards the surface here. The Cape values are much better at the surface for this setup here, and I think that's still going to be a key component for tornado genesis if it is at all in the cards. Given the other parameters, it definitely seems like a possibility, but I do think this surface cape probably is going to be one of the main driving forces. Mixed layer is not going to be all that great, but that's pretty common for this time of year here. And I'm pretty sure I made a mistake of saying that last map we were looking at was mixed layer. But as we go forward here, we look at the GFS. Not really a whole lot to be had during this time of year. Not surprising, especially as we look at the longer range maps here. The Cape is not really much of anything to write home about. You just look at those small little subtleties to try to find any kind of signal at all. But obviously the GFS a little bit inconclusive with the setup. Euro looks a little bit better at the moment for the longest range of setups, but obviously being so far out, not really much of anything that I can latch on to at this point. Just to keep things kind of linear here, let's also be fair and take a look at the Euro. So we'll look at the surface cape with that. And honestly, this is a feature that Pivotal didn't even have, which is nice. But you can see a little bit of a signal for tonight. Nothing to write home about there. If we were to go ahead and look at tomorrow's signal, it seems like the Euro wants things to develop a little bit earlier in the day, maybe over here, and then progress off towards the east based off what I'm seeing here. But it's kind of inconclusive. It's a little bit different from the GFS again, and this is kind of the consequence of that. It seems like the best corridor for any sort of storm development might form off over towards this way, but it seems like it would kind of fall off a little bit quicker. All right. And now that we've looked at that, let's go ahead and skip to the interesting part, which is really at the end of this model run here. Now, like I said, obviously looking at range, you aren't going to have super high Cape values, even if you have a stout trough or some sort of frontal boundary that'll come in that's showing about 300 hours out plus. So nothing to really write home about, but we had to check for curiosity's sake. But even so, I do see a little bit of a rising going on here. We'll have to see how that develops going forward based off the wind barbs, though. I'm not really sure if I'm latching on to that at this point. So let's go ahead now and take a look at what the simulated radar could look like. We're going to kind of roll through this one a little bit fast, try to keep this video under 20 minutes if it's at all possible. So Euro's going to come back on the screen here. You can start to see an increase in activity towards the back half of the run here, although it's not quite as stout as what we're seeing on the Euro. Look at that in comparison. But you can see from the very beginning of the run, business just as a whole definitely looks like it's trying to pick up. Now there are a lot of reasons for that, and for that I urge you to watch the October outlook and also the fall videos as to why that is. We don't want to make this video too much longer, obviously, as we mentioned before. But between the increase in shower and thunderstorm activity towards the eastern half of the map here, we also have the return of a little bit of wintry precip over here as well, over towards the Rockies. It's going to be kind of few and far in between, but it's just our reminder, the season is changing. But that being said, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Everyone take care and have a wonderful rest of your night.